U.S. President Joe Biden says he is worried about Chinese hypersonic missiles. Media reports suggest China tested a nuclear-capable hypersonic weapon in August. China denies that, saying they conducted a, quote, routine spacecraft experiment. It's the latest in ongoing tensions between the West and the world's second largest economy. Earlier this week, China condemned Canada and the U.S. for sending warships through the Taiwan Strait, a naval exercise that came after China flew about 150 military aircraft through Taiwan's air defense identification zone. So, what does it all mean for Canada? J. Michael Cole is a senior fellow with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute and a senior fellow at the Global Taiwan Institute in Washington, D.C., and he previously served as an analyst with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service in Ottawa. Mr. Cole is in Taipei, Taiwan. Mr. Cole, can you describe for us, from your perspective, the state of the relationship between China and the West right now, and just how bad are these tensions?
It's certainly an increasingly contentious relationship. We've been seeing over the past few years the emergence of what looks like a clash of ideologies between the Western-led liberal democratic order on the one hand and a group of revisionist authoritarian states, very much with China in the lead, that is trying to challenge the longstanding global order, and that is increasingly assertive and self-confident, certainly again with China, that has an economy to back its military. And now we are really seeing, we're at an inflection point, if you will, that the next few years will very much decide who gets to set the rules for the international order. And for those of us who are based here in Taiwan, we're right in the middle. We're on the front lines, if you will, of that clash of ideologies, or a new lowercase Cold War, if you will.
As you mentioned, you are in Taiwan. I'm curious as to how people there are feeling about this rise in tensions.
The Taiwanese people have lived under the shadow of the China threat for several decades. For many, many years, China has threatened to use force against Taiwan if the Taiwanese people refuse to reunify with Beijing with China, as Beijing claims, or to be annexed, as most people in Taiwan regard the issue. Now, the Taiwanese are very pragmatic. They realize that China also needs to take into consideration the impact that harsh measures in the Taiwan Strait would potentially have on its own economy, on global perceptions, and even possibly leading to a clash with United States and other regional powers like Japan. Now, the Taiwanese are quite adamant that the liberal democratic way of life is non-negotiable for themselves. They have seen the example of Hong Kong in recent years as well under the one country, two systems formula. And this is very definitely something that they do not want for themselves. So they're pragmatic. They're looking on at what's going on across the Taiwan Strait with concern, particularly under President Xi Jinping in China. Authoritarianism has deepened. The country has become more ideological, certainly more controlling of its own people. But we're not seeing panic on the streets in Taiwan either. The government certainly pushes for preparedness, for awareness. It still sends out signals to Beijing that they're willing to sit down and negotiate with the government in Beijing, but with no preconditions, and also for them to negotiate as equals.
You sort of alluded to this in your answer there, but when you look at the current state of play, you know, Taiwan's foreign minister told this show earlier this year that Taipei looks at what happened in Hong Kong and fears it could be next. You know, how do you interpret China's intentions here?
China is, the big problem with China is the government continues to claim that only a small group of people in the Taiwanese government, ruled by the Democratic Progressive Party, are opposed to the so-called inevitable historical trend of unification and the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. Now, if I were an advisor to President Xi Jinping and I had all the information at hand, I would know full well that this is poppycock. The great majority of people in Taiwan do not support unification with China. Support for unification with China is in the low single digits. And the great majority of people here either identify with the Republic of China, which is the official designation of Taiwan, or they themselves are seeking eventually a Republic of Taiwan. Now, the problem with that is Chinese rhetoric domestically in its own propaganda continues to maintain that trends are moving in China's favor, that they have things under control and whatnot. The reality is that Taiwan, for a good number of years, has been slipping away. And as time passes, support for unification or self-identification as Taiwanese has clearly shifted in unfavorable terms for China. So I apprehend that at some point the regime in Beijing could realize that its own legitimacy with its own people, because it has painted itself into a corner through its rhetoric, would compel the regime to take more drastic action in the Taiwan Strait, if only to make sure that its own legitimacy with the Chinese people does not threaten its ability to remain in power.
Now, Canada is not a major player on the world stage when it comes to this issue, but this country, Canada, knows firsthand the consequences of what can happen when you are in the crosshairs with China. From your perspective, what role does Canada have when it comes to addressing the rise of China?
Canada is among the community of democracies. This is how we Canadians self-identify. This is the values that define us. And now it has very serious decisions to make, whether it wants to more robustly join the group of democracies that are now increasingly working together to push back against authoritarian expansionism and attempts to rewrite human rights and democracy and whatnot within international institutions, or to remain on the sidelines and allow those countries to more and more define the kind of world that we and future generations will live in. Canada is a middle power. Obviously, it cannot challenge the Chinese on military terms. But what we need really is a growing coalition of countries that bring all kinds of things to the table. It's not just military. It's economic. It's technology. It's a promotion of human rights, promotion of democracy, combating sharp power, political warfare within our own institutions, within our own countries. Protecting our own minorities that also have a say in what's going on in my part of the world, around Taiwan and Hong Kong and China. So what we need really is for all these countries to work together to align their policies. And in doing so, I maintain that that would contribute to a stronger deterrent against more destabilizing activities by countries like China.
We have less than 30 seconds here. If Canada does, assert itself in the way that you would like to see Canada assert itself, should it brace for any blowback when it comes to, taking a firmer stance against China? Is there anything that the Canadian that there should be bracing for if that happens?
Okay, there will be bluster, but we've seen much smaller, more vulnerable countries like the Czech Republic recently, countries like Lithuania, that actually defied Beijing's so-called red lines by engaging more Taiwan, and they all survived through the whole thing. So certainly, medium powers like Canada, whose economy is actually not all that dependent on the Chinese economy, can afford to have their own policies. But the problem is that for far too long, we've allowed Beijing's coercion to define our own foreign policy. That certainly needs to change.
All right, Mr. Cole, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.